They say money smells clean, but what happens when genuine grit challenges polished arrogance? One woman knew exactly how to make the chrome walls of corporate agriculture tremble. This is the story of how quickly judgment turns to disaster, and the true cost of underestimating the farmer in the room. The air inside AgriCapital didn't smell like dirt or diesel. It smelled of leveraged debt, imported leather, and fresh ambition. Everything here was sharp angles and blinding light. Chrome surfaces gleamed, reflecting the harsh fluorescent glow of success. This was where billion-dollar crops were planted, transactions conducted in hushed whispers. A cathedral dedicated to yield. Then the automatic doors hissed open, shattering the imposed silence. She walked in Sarah. Her boots were caked thick with red clay, a geological map of yesterday's failures and today's promises. The worn denim of her coveralls absorbed the light, a stark contrast to the sterile white floor. She didn't pause. She didn't look impressed. She looked tired. She looked dangerous. The sales team, 3 men in tailored suits, stopped talking mid-sentence. They saw the mud. They saw the weariness. They didn't see the zero in her bank account. They exchanged glances. A silent, venomous assessment passed between them. Contempt, immediate and icy. Sarah ignored the sizing up. Her voice, rough from dust and shouting over machinery, cut through the quiet. I need the big bud 747. Mark adjusted the cuff of his Italian suit, the movement precise, almost ritualistic. His smile didn't reach his eyes. It was a professional shield polished to a toxic sheen. The 747, he repeated, savoring the number like a joke he was about to explain. A formidable choice, ma'am. We certainly have the model range. But tell me, before we jump straight to the stratosphere, perhaps we should look at optimization. Are we replacing an existing unit or scaling up? Because the 747 is, well, it's a legend. It's also often far more tractor than the average, shall we say. Asterisk boutique, asterisk operation requires. The term boutique hung in the sterile air, heavy with implied insult. Sarah's expression didn't shift, but the mud on her boots seemed to darken, a small chemical reaction to the condescension. She hadn't said asterisk. Why asterisk? She needed it, only that she did. Mark stepped neatly around a clod of clay Sarah had tracked in, moving toward a digital display flashing specifications for the new 500 series. This line, the 525, it's been incredibly popular. Excellent fuel efficiency, superb torque, distribution ideal for maneuvering those tighter irrigation pivots. We're talking about massive savings on input costs right out of the gate. He didn't wait for her response, treating her presence as merely confirmation that he was correct. He pressed a finger to the screen, highlighting a horsepower number that was barely half of the 747's rating. Look, we want to match the machine to the asterisk operator asterisk, not just the acreage. We find that sometimes the true workhorse isn't the biggest, but the smartest. Sarah finally spoke, her voice still rough, cutting across his rehearsed spiel. The pivots are already set, and fuel costs are irrelevant if the machine breaks before harvest. I said this 747. Mark laughed, a quick, dismissive burst of air. Right. We all love the dream machine. But let's be real here. That 747 requires specialized transport, specific attachments, and honestly, a huge amount of capital outlay just sitting idle. For most operations that size, he paused, gesturing vaguely at her worn clothes. It's frankly too much machine to handle the complexity. We wouldn't want you signing on to something that swamps your existing infrastructure. He hadn't asked about her infrastructure. He had decided it was deficient. She stared past him, toward a framed picture of the AgriCapital founder shaking hands with the senator. My infrastructure is designed to handle it. My chimney is not. I have 300,000 acres of winter wheat ready for tillage. If this rain front hits, before I can turn that soil, I lose everything. The casual delivery of the figure 300,000 should have made Mark choke on his breath. It was a number usually reserved for multinational conglomerates, not a solitary figure caked in clay. He didn't believe it for a second. Mark recovered quickly, choosing to treat the number as an exaggeration or a joke. 300,000. Wow, that's single quotes. Well, that's certainly a target to aim for. But even if we assume a fraction of that is in play right now, liquidity becomes the priority, doesn't it? The 747 requires an almost immediate cash wire, or a financial history that, forgive me, suggests you're already running a fleet of equivalent size. He was probing for the weakness of financing gap, the credit check failure. He expected her to flinch at the mention of the wire transfer. She didn't. The financial history is fine, Sarah replied, the corners of her mouth twitching slightly, a movement so fleeting it was barely a smile. And yes, a fleet is already in operation. I'm replacing the original Big Bud 747, serial number 001. It finally threw a rod yesterday afternoon. It's sitting roadside 70 miles from here, waiting for a flatbed. Mark's composure flickered. Serial number 001. That machine was legendary, a museum piece almost, and certainly a machine that belonged to one of the legacy families. He suddenly realized the worn denim wasn't just oldeth, was asterisk, inheriteth, asterisk. The immediate assumption of small-time farming fractured. Mark leaned in conspiratorially, changing his tactic from dismissal to skeptical curiosity. The original, that changes things. But even then, the logistics of purchasing NU 747 the count, the liens, the insurance, rider seats, not a snap decision. It takes planning. We need proof of insurance binders for a vehicle valued at this level. He was still delaying, requiring hoops to be jumped through, unwilling to admit he had misjudged her based solely on mud and denim. I have 3 hours, Sarah stated flatly. The front is moving fast, and the insurance binder is sitting in my truck, stamped and dated. The only lien I have is against the yield I haven't planted yet. I need the delivery manifest started. Now, her patience had evaporated entirely. The weariness in her eyes had been replaced by a sharp, flinty resolve. Mark glanced over at his colleagues, who had been listening in stunned silence. They looked less amused and more nervous. Mark still couldn't let go of the control. He needed to be the gatekeeper. Look, I appreciate the urgency, truly, but this is a monumental purchase. We can walk you through the certified refurbished units right now. They're already on the lot. They come with a better warranty, and frankly, they're perfectly fine for an operation that's just starting to transition into modern equipment. He tried to lead her physically toward a section labeled Beyond Excellence, implicitly suggesting her old machine, and thus her method, was obsolete. Sarah didn't move. She just stared at the polished leather of Mark's shoes, then slowly raised her gaze until it met his. The silence stretched, thick and painful. You think I came here to haggle over used parts and warranties? I came here because Agricapital promised delivery within the window. I need the 747 fully fueled, ready to roll off the flatbed in 2 hours and 40 minutes. Either you print the purchase agreement now, or I drive to your competitor, Iron Giants, who promised me the same delivery window 5 minutes ago. Mark's face finally lost its professional veneer. He realized this wasn't an inquiry. It was a transaction already decided, hinging only on his speed. He hadn't been selling, he had been obstructing. The sheer cost of losing that sailing, the subsequent contracts, implied by 300,000 acres flashed across his mind. He quickly straightened his tie, the arrogance replaced by panicked deference. Right, the purchase agreement. Follow me, ma'am. Mark rushed Sarah past the polished displays, his earlier composure shattered. He gestured nervously towards a cramped back office, a space usually reserved for closing minor tractor deals, not handling a $3 million transaction. The silence that worked against him now belonged entirely to Sarah. She sat down not in the plush customer chair, but on the edge of the auxiliary desk, treating the entire office like a temporary inconvenience. He slapped the printed contract down, but before he could slide a pen toward her, she stopped him with a raised hand. "Mark," she said, her voice dropping to a cool, flat tone that promised danger. "I don't sign until I verify." She didn't mean the warranty clauses or the interest rate Agricapital was providing. She pointed instead to the detailed specification sheet hidden deep within the binder. The Big Bud 747 is running a modified Allison HT 750 CRD transmission, correct? Mark instantly relaxed, puffing out his chest slightly. "Yes, ma'am. Standard for the heavy haul package." He topped the manual confidently. Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. "Standard," she echoed, the word dripping with skepticism. "Then tell me, what is the exact viscosity, tolerance, variance required for the synthetic fluid under sustained 105-degree Fahrenheit operation when running a dual-pump PTO setup?" Mark's smile froze. This wasn't standard sales knowledge. This was shop floor expertise, the kind that costs thousands in specialized training. The surrounding staff, Brenda, who handled finance, and Gary, the parts manager, looked up from their screens, sensing the shift from routine negotiation to interrogation. Mark stammered, flipping frantically through generic marketing bullet points. We ... We follow manufacturer recommendations, of course. It's high-grade synthetic, rated for maximum performance. Sarah didn't flinch. She leaned forward, pushing the paperwork aside. "Maximum performance is a slogan, Mark. I need the numbers. Specifically, the hydraulic pressure tolerances on the dual-circuit steering system. If the load shifts suddenly with the cultivator attachment, what is the instantaneous pressure spike threshold before the relief valve risks catastrophic failure? Give me the psi range." Mark's face was slick with sudden perspiration. He knew the general operating parameters, the big, round figures they taught in the quarterly seminars, but the exact psi range for failure tolerance, that information was buried deep in the technical maintenance manuals, accessible only to certified master mechanics and, apparently, Sarah. He realized, with a sickening jolt, that he hadn't just insulted a customer. He had fundamentally underestimated a professional peer. She wasn't an owner. She was the chief engineer of her domain, and she was dismantling his entire facade piece by piece. "I can pull the digital schematics," he mumbled, reaching for his laptop, his fingers visibly shaking, betraying his sudden panic. "Please do," Sarah instructed, her gaze hard and unwavering. "Because the unit I ordered was customized by Agritech Northa. Auxiliary circuit was specifically adjusted to handle the new subsurface ripper blade requiring 3,200 psi continuous output. I need confirmation that your pre-delivery checklist confirmed the system can sustain asterisk, Mark. Not the stock 2,800 psi." The sound of the keyboard clicking stopped across the office. Brenda slid her chair back an inch, her eyes wide as saucers. This wasn't just a tough client. This was a potential liability scenario unfolding in real time. Gary quickly pretended to be preoccupied with a shelf of air filters, but his ears were burning. They had been told this flagship unit was ready to roll. Yet here was the customer detailing bespoke modifications the sales manager clearly hadn't even noted, let alone confirmed. The corporate incompetence was palpable, hanging heavy in the air. Mark finally found the digital but the proprietary interface was confusing him under the immense psychological pressure Sarah was applying. He desperately tried to pivot back to something he knew, anything familiar. Look, Sarah, the Big Bud is legendary for its resilience. We've ensured all systems adhere to the rigorous safety standard of "Stop selling me" slogans. Mark, she cut him off, sharp and precise as a laser beam. If the solenoid valve governing the flow rate to the primary lift cylinder is rated at 4.5 liters per minute, but the secondary spool valve is accidentally set to 5.1 liters per minute, known as shuith. Really? Production runs what is the immediate risk to the transmission cooler efficiency. He stared blankly at the screen, completely baffled by the obscurity of the data point. He grabbed for the term, any technical term he could recall from his initial training slides, that would cause a momentary cavitation issue in the pump housing. Sarah just shook her head, a slow, damning movement that destroyed his last shred of authority. No, Mark, cavitation is secondary. The asterisk, immediate asterisk risk, is the heat spike destroying the low-temp seal in the oil pan gasket within 15 minutes of heavy operation, which means the transmission will burn itself alive before it even makes it across the first section of my field. Now, tell me, was that seal verified during The silence that followed was physically crushing. Mark couldn't lie. He didn't know what seal she was talking about, let alone whether the entry-level mechanics Agricapita employed had checked it. He glanced wildly at the clock on the wall above Gary's head. 2 hours and 28 minutes until the stated deadline. Every second he spent trying to look competent was a second lost from actually doing the final inspection the machine desperately required. Sarah wasn't just stalling, she was actively running down the clock, demonstrating that his initial obstruction had now created an impossible logistical bottleneck for delivery. He should have just printed the contract and rushed the inspection. Now he was trapped in a technical cross-examination he couldn't possibly pass. The price of his arrogance wasn't just the loss of commission. It was the potential corporate liability of selling a high-risk machine that hadn't been properly vetted against its own customized specifications. He gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles bone white under the fluorescent lights. Brenda scribbled a note rapidly and slid it discreetly under the phone to Gary, advising him to pull the full technical service record immediately, hoping against hope to find the obscure answers Sarah was demanding before Mark accidentally confirmed total institutional ignorance. Sarah watched this furtive exchange, her expression unchanged, noting the ripple of cold panic spreading through the entire sales team. She let the tension build, allowing the entire office to realize they had sold a machine they didn't fully understand to a client they had profoundly offended. Finally, she leaned back, satisfied with the chaos she had methodically sown. "Mark," she concluded, her voice now dangerously soft, ensuring every ear in the vicinity could hear her judgment. "The Big Bud 747 is a specialized tool that demands precision. You sell it as if it were a simple garden tiller. The problem isn't the tractor, which I know inside and out. The problem, I suspect, is that you don't actually employ anyone capable of conducting the proper checks for this asterisk level of equipment. And now we are 25 minutes away from your delivery promise failing." Mark inhaled sharply, utterly defeated and exposed. "I'll call the head of service immediately," he croaked, pushing his chair violently backward, realizing he had to outsource his own job description to the only person left who might save the transaction. Mark's hands were shaking as he fumbled for his phone, sweat gluing his shirt to his back. He needed to reassert dominance, even if it was a phantom authority. He stopped dialing, turned back to Sarah, forcing a brittle smile that didn't reach his terrified eyes. "Look, miss, whatever you think you know about hydraulics and pressure manifolds, this whole performance is just delaying the inevitable. The service head will fix your Sarah raised a single, elegant hand, cutting him off mid. The movement was economical, utterly decisive, and held the force of a slammed vault door. The sound of the chair scraping on the polished concrete floor, the very sound of Mark's desperate retreat, echoed in the sudden, painful silence. Her previous gentle tone vanished, replaced by a clarity that bordered on octave. My performance? Mark, you assume this is about a minor technical glitch. You assume I am merely an inconvenient customer who decided to read a manual. She paused, letting her gaze sweep over the huddled sales staff. Guinea, fiddling uselessly with a pen, Brenna staring wide-eyed at her monitor. The entire ecosystem of sales arrogance suddenly holding its breath. They were watching not a crisis, but an execution. Let me save your head of service the wasted trip, Sarah continued, her voice resonating, carrying easily across the showroom floor, where potential customers were now discreetly trying to listen in. The problem isn't the delivery time, Mark. The problem is the foundation of trust you just demolished. You have spent the last hour treating the largest acquisition in this dealership's quarterly projections as if it were a negotiation over a used lawnmower. Mark blinked, genuinely confused. He knew this was a massive order, but he didn't grasp the scale of the client. He stammered, The client knows we value their business." Miss Sarah gave a slow, predatory smile. "Oh, the client knows. Mark, trust me. The client is acutely aware of how they have been valued." She leaned forward again, placing both hands flat on the desk, mimicking Mark's aggressive posture from earlier, reversing the physical power dynamic completely. "Let's dispense with the assumptions of who I am and assuming I am the personal purchasing agent for a very wealthy, very busy farmer. That farmer, the owner of the fields stretching from the Black River up to the foothills of the North Peak, that's Acre Holdings." The name dropped like a safe hitting asphalt. Kenny actually gasped. Acre Holdings hadn't placed an order this size in 5 years. The color drained from Mark's face, leaving a pale, mottled gray. Acre Holdings. The name was whispered in the hallways of every agricultural dealership in the tri-state area, monolithic corporate entity that controlled nearly 40% of the state's arable land. Their contract, their ongoing maintenance deals, their future acquisitions represented the financial lifeblood of this dealership. Suddenly, the entire staff understood why the general manager had been hovering near the glass wall all morning, looking sickly. Mark swallowed hard, trying to assemble an apology, but the words stuck in his throat, thick and useless. He looked at Sarah, truly seeing her for the first time, noticing the bespoke tailoring under the rugged field jacket, the dye-made flash in her small earring. He knew the lead contact for Acre Holdings was notoriously private, rarely photographed, intensely and universally referred to only as the proprietor. He just hadn't expected the proprietor to look like this. Why had nobody told him the initial vetting was a formality, not a test? Sarah watched the slow-motion horror register on Mark's face with clinical detachment. The tension was now so thick, it felt like the air conditioning had frozen solid. She waited until the silence was unbearable, until the only sound was the distant hum of machinery in the service bay, oblivious to the corporate implosion occurring 50 feet away. Then she delivered the final, crushing blow. "And while I appreciate your attempts to escalate my technical queries to a qualified member of the service team, Marked," she said, leaning in conspiratorially, yet loud enough for the general manager's sickly shadow in the window to hear, "I believe the service head reports directly to the chief operating officer, and the crew reports directly to me." She adjusted the cuff of her jacket, a gesture of absolute, effortless authority. "My name is Sarah Hawthorne. I am the CEO, owner, and sole authorized signatory of Acre Holdings. And this Big Bud 747 is the first piece of equipment in a proposed 5-year, $50 million rolling contract designed to modernize my entire fleet. A contract, I should mention, that currently requires my signature to move forward." The staff reaction was immediate and visceral. Brenda gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. Kenny dropped his pen, the clatter echoing loudly. The general manager, witnessing the catastrophe unfolding, disappeared instantly from the window, presumably heading for the nearest phone or stress reliever. Mark didn't just look defeated. He looked like his skeleton had dissolved. He sank back into his chair, the aggressive push from minutes before replaced by a pathetic slump. He realized the colossal error of his judgment. He hadn't merely lost a sale. He had jeopardized the employment of everyone in the building. He had belittled the single most important client in the company's history over a simple hydraulic pressure sensor check. Sarah stood up, pulling her keys from her pocket. The sound of the keys jangling was the loudest noise in the showroom. He felt an icy certainty that this revelation was merely the prelude to the inevitable corporate termination. "You see, Mark," Sarah continued, walking slowly toward the exit, pausing just long enough to let the weight of her words crush him entirely. "I don't just buy tractors. I buy partnerships based on competence and mutual respect. I came here today, incognito, specifically to assess the cultural capacity of your operation before committing to this long-term relationship. I needed to know if your frontline staff treated every client, whether they drove a rusty pickup or a corporate jet, with the same standard of expertise." She reached the large glass doors. "It seems the answer is clear. You failed the basic vetting test. You prioritized dismissive arrogance over fundamental technical knowledge and professional courtesy." She looked back, addressing not just Mark, but the shell-shocked room. "The delivery window, which you are so proud of hitting, is irrelevant now, because I won't be needing the Big Bud 747 delivered today or tomorrow." The $50 million contract had just evaporated into the thin air of Mark's dismissal. The glass door stood open, framing the parking lot. Yet Sarah did not step through. She remained on the threshold, a human fulcrum upon which the entire $50 million transaction balanced. The silence in the showroom was so thick it felt like cotton lodged in the throat of every employee present. Mark, pale and sweating, looked like a statue carved from cheap plaster, utterly incapable of movement or defense. Gary, the regional manager, finally moved, taking 2 hesitant steps towards Sarah, his eyes pleading for a lifeline that Sarah had no intention of throwing. "Wait," Gary croaked, his voice cracking under the weight of the cancelled deal. "Miss, whoever you are, we can fix this. Mark is one salesman. He doesn't define the entire operation. Please, let's talk about the 747. Sarah turned back slowly, the faint, calculating smile returning to her lips. She hadn't canceled the deal. She had simply postponed judgment. Mark was right about one thing. The Big Bud 747 was exactly the machine she needed. Asterisk. The cancellation was the leverage, not the conclusion. Asterisk. 88 words. "The machine is satisfactory," Sarah stated, her voice suddenly businesslike, stripped of the previous theatrical scorn. "My technical team's analysis was thorough. The Big Bud 747 performs precisely to the specifications required for the scale of my operation." Gary's shoulders sagged in relief, then immediately tensed again. He knew the shoe hadn't dropped it, was currently hovering over his head, heavy and spiked. "The issue, Gary," Sarah continued, using his name for the first time, establishing a direct connection while simultaneously cementing Marquez's irrelevance, was never the hardware. It was the human firmware. And the human firmware requires immediate, irreversible debugging. Asterisk, Gary realized that Sarah had likely obtained internal performance reviews on Mark before she even walked in the door, making the vetting process far more sinister than a simple test of courtesy. Asterisk 94 words. Sarah walked back 3 steps, stopping directly in front of Mark without looking at him. I will purchase the Big Bud 747. Immediate transaction. Full asking price. Cash. The word cash hung in the air, instantly silencing any potential corporate excuses Gary might have prepared regarding financing delays. But the agreement came with conditions, non-negotiable terms of justice. Condition number 1. Mark Holloway is to be terminated immediately. Effective this no notice second. No severance package. And certainly no reference. Mark flinched, as if physically struck, his mouth opening in a silent gasp. Asterisk, Sarah knew that cash meant the dealership wouldn't have to wait for corporate approval, forcing Gary's hand to prioritize the immediate influx of capital over his loyalty to a toxic subordinate. Asterisk, 102 words, I understand. Termination is harsh, but we have protocols, Gary stammered, instinctively falling back on HR guidelines, even as millions of dollars hung in the balance. Sarah didn't wait for him to finish. She held up a single, manicured finger, cutting him off mid-plea. Protocols are for organizations that haven't just lost $50 million due to a single employee's rampant misogyny and incompetence. My second condition pertains directly to that commission structure Mark was so eager to brag about when he assumed I was a nuisance, wasting his time. Sarah paused, letting the implications sink in. The commission was substantial, easily a 6-figure sum. Asterisk. It dawned on Gary that Sarah wasn't just wealthy. She had access to the dealership's internal compensation schedules, meaning someone inside had already cooperated with her vetting process. Asterisk 107 words. That commission, the entirety of it, is to be divided equally among the remaining sales and technical staff who were present and did not actively display dismissive arrogance or technical ignorance this afternoon. I noticed the young mechanic who stayed polite despite Mark's blatant attempts to undercut him. I noticed the receptionist who offered me coffee even after Mark told her I was just kicking tires. The staff members, Menchanda Juye, mechanic named Leo, and the receptionist. Clara looked up, their shock rapidly transforming into a mixture of stunned hope and terror. Asterisk. The financial windfall for the junior employees was so massive relative to their salaries that it threatened to disrupt the internal hierarchy of the entire branch, creating immediate resentment from those who didn't qualify. Asterisk 100 words. This isn't punitive, Gary. It's an incentive-structured correction, Sarah continued, her voice resonating with cold authority. It sends a clear message. Competence and courtesy are rewarded. Arrogance is not just penalized, it is financially redistributed. She pulled a sleek tablet from her designer handbag. I need you to send a security email to your corporate CFO right now. Confirm Mark's immediate zero payout termination and confirm the commission redistribution. Once that email is acknowledged, the funds not a check, Gary, but a direct, instantaneous wire transfer from Geneva will hit your account immediately. We are talking minutes, not hours. Asterisk, Gary recognized the specific security features of the tablet. It wasn't consumer grade. This woman wasn't just a rich farmer. She was a major player operating on a global financial scale. Asterisk 108 words. Gary wrestled with the impossibility. He couldn't unilaterally terminate a high-performing, if odious, salesman and redistribute a commission without corporate sign-off. But waiting meant losing the largest sale of the fiscal year. He looked at Mark, who was now weeping silently, understanding the finality of the disaster he had wrought. "I need a few hours to process the paperwork legally," Gary pleaded, trying to buy time to call his legal team. Sarah shook her head once. "No, the competition across the state, agricultural titans, they are ready to sell me their equivalent model, the Titan X900. The offer is slightly inferior, but their staff passed my preliminary vetting last week. Asterisk. The only reason I chose this location was the speed of your quoted delivery window. A window that now requires immediate, binding commitment to my terms of employment justice. Asterisk. 97 word. That was the final blow. Gary realized she hadn't just vetted them. She had run a simultaneous, competitive procurement process. He reached for his phone, bypassing his legal team and dialing the mobile number of the CEO himself, man who would certainly pick up when $50 million was at stake. Sarah watched him dial, her expression unchanging. Mark suddenly found his voice, a ragged whisper. "Please, Sarah, I need this. I have a family." He took a step toward her, extending a pleading hand. Sarah finally turned her full attention to him, freezing him with a look. Asterisk. Before Mark could utter another plea, Sarah revealed that the building itself, the very showroom they were standing in, was leased by a holding company she had quietly acquired 3 months ago, making her his ultimate landlord. Asterisk. 99 words. You should have thought of your family when you decided that arrogance was a substitute for professional competence, she said sharply. Gary hung up the phone, his face pale but resolute. The CEO agrees. Mark Holloway is terminated, effective immediately. Commission redistribution is being processed through a specialized escrow account to protect against clawbacks. He looked at Mark. "Get your personal belongings and leave the premises." Sarah nodded curtly, satisfaction gleaming briefly in her eyes. The tablet in her hand pinged, confirming the transfer initiation. The money was moving. Excellent. Now, Mark, as your final act of employment, you will train the new senior sales consultant who has been waiting patiently in the customer lounge for the last 2 hours on the specifics of the 747's advanced hydraulic system. Asterisk. She gestured toward the lounge, and a sharply dressed woman holding a stack of technical manuals walked into the showroom, introducing herself as Sarah's personal lead technical consultant, ready to take Mark's place instantly. Asterisk. 110 words. Sarah finalized the transaction with Gary, ignoring Mark's broken departure. She collected a simple, signed sales receipt, Big Bud 747, paid in full cash. "This machine will be shipped to the address provided tomorrow morning," she commanded. As she turned toward the door for the final time, she paused, addressing Gary and the stunned junior staff, who were still processing their unexpected fortune. "And Gary," she added, her voice dropping conspiratorially, yet loud enough for everyone to hear, "the Big Bud 747 is just the test run. My company requires a minimum of 50 custom-modified units over the next 3 years. The contract for that fleet, it is now entirely conditional on the sustained and measurable positive cultural capacity of your remaining team." Asterisk. "The real partnership and the real money starts. Now, don't let me down, or the next termination won't be just one salesman. It will be this entire franchise." Asterisk. 118 words. Gary, visibly shaking but resolute, gave the nod to security. Mark, his face draining of all color, sputtered a defense that dissolved into pathetic pleas of it was just a joke. Gary cut him short, his voice flat and laced with corrending finality. "Your severance is being processed. Mark, you are trespassing." The heavy silence of the showroom was shattered only by the metallic squeak of the security guard's belt buckle as Mark, the embodiment of arrogance, was escorted past the very desk where he had sealed his own financial ruin. The remaining staff watched the departure, a collective gasp of realization hitting them. They had all been accomplices in judgment, mistaking quiet competence for lack of means. The dealership, usually a bastion of loud, aggressive salesmanship, was momentarily transformed into a church of sudden, brutal introspection. Sarah paused, her hand already on the simple handle of her sedan, glancing back at the Big Bud 747, the silent green giant she had purchased with a signature and a smirk. It was a machine designed to move mountains of earth, and today it had moved mountains of misguided assumption. She pulled out onto the road, the low rumble of her engine disappearing quickly, leaving behind not just a transaction, but a transformation. The Big Bud 747 remained, towering over the glossy showroom floor, an immovable $3 million testament to the speed and efficiency of financial karma. The staff learned, in one devastating hour, that the most potent power often arrives not draped in gold, but disguised in gray, ready to exploit the weakness of arrogance. The true cost of the Big Bud 747 was not measured in dollars, but in the swift, unforgiving price of disrespect. Thank you for watching this conclusion. If you enjoyed this powerful tale of reversal and reckoning, please like this video, subscribe for more master screenwriting breakdowns, and hit the notification bell